In this video, I'm going to walk you through the exact discovery call framework that took me from failing on a PIP to the #1 sales rep at Salesforce. And this is the same framework I coach my clients on to consistently crush their calls and build real pipelines that actually close. By the end of this video, you're going to have a repeatable discovery framework that you can run on every single call. So #1, your buyer feels like it was a great use of their time. #2, objections are going to throw you into a tailspin. And #3, you'll always leave with clear, committed next steps. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe so you can keep getting real strategies and frameworks just like this so that you can leverage tech sales to unlock real financial freedom. Now let's get into it. So first is, how do we get on the same side as the buyer? Because most reps, they actually lose the deal in the first 2 to 3 minutes of the call, and they don't even realize it. They jump straight into, hey, so tell me about your role, with zero framing. Now what framing the call actually does is setting the expectations, establishing rules of engagement, and getting clear on what the outcome is for the call so both you and the buyer are on the same side of the table. Now why it matters, it's going to lower their guard, it's going to position you as a partner, not a pitcher, and it gives you permission to ask deeper, harder questions later. And if you skip this, buyers are just going to default into vendor mode. They're going to give you surface level answers and just try to rush you to a demo. Now, really quickly, when you frame it, how long it takes. I want you to frame the call right after you do introductions, and you're gonna do it before you do any deep discovery. Now, it shouldn't take any longer than 60 seconds. This isn't a TED Talk, just clear expectations. And here's exactly how I frame my discovery calls. First, I wanna make sure that I'm clear in your situation, so I wanna ask you a few questions to understand how are you doing X today, to really understand like what's working, also what's not. And if it seems like we can actually help, I'll share how other teams just like yours are approaching this. And by the end, we'll both know if it makes sense to keep going. And if so, we'll talk about what the best next step is. But if it doesn't make sense, that's totally okay. We can just call it here. How does it sound? Now, here's some key pieces. We're setting the agenda. We're communicating this is a mutual decision. Hey, we're both going to know. And we're removing pressure. Hey, if it doesn't make sense, that's totally okay. And you're positioning the call as a working session, not a monologue. Here's a couple tips and mistakes to avoid. I want you to get explicit agreement. How does that sound? And wait for their yes, not rush past it. Get clear on the outcome. We're going to know if it makes sense and what the right next step is. Help them understand what the end destination is. Give them permission to say no and normalize it. This is going to help you build trust and honesty. Now, what I want you to avoid is dumping your life story. They don't care. And they also don't care about your 5-minute monologue about what your company does and all their accolade, especially before you ask anything about their business. Or jumping into, hey, today I'm going to jump into a demo on the first call before you understand anything about their business. Another mistake is like not framing the call and just winging it. Because if you get the frame right, everything else gets easier. Now let's talk about behavior and how to make it a great use of their time. Because your #1 goal in any discovery call is very simple. Your buyer leaves that call and thinking, hey, that was a good use of my time. Because if they don't do that, nothing else matters. So here's what a good use of time actually means to a buyer. From the buyer's perspective, a great call feels like they got new clarity on their problem. They learned something. Maybe there's an insight, a benchmark, a best practice. You ask real thoughtful questions that no one else asked. You respected their time. You didn't ramble. And they should feel more organized and confident about the problem than they did before the call. Now let's talk about when behavior matters the most. Now, of course, behavior matters the whole time, but here's a couple of hot spots. First 5 minutes of the call. That's when they decide if you're worth opening up to. When they're sharing real details, you're listening and note-taking in the last 5 minutes, because that's how you summarize, align, and set next steps. Because these moments either build trust or destroy it. Here's how to make it feel like a great use of their time. A couple of behaviors that I like to focus on is #1, thinking more like a surgeon and not a survey taker. Because think about it, a surgeon is all about precision. Survey takers are more generic. I'm also not trying to interrupt them. I'm also not trying to just jump into my next question. I want to make sure I let them finish. I want to explore what they share and dig deeper. And then I also want to make sure I'm summarizing and reflecting back on what I'm hearing so that they feel heard. So I'll say something like, hey, let me play back what I heard just to make sure I got it right. And then you're going to reflect. You're going to share what you heard about their current process, their main problems, their impact. And then you're going to ask, hey, did I miss anything? Did I get anything wrong? Anything else you want to add? And then what you want to do is connect the dots with insights. Bring patterns from other customers, because reflection without insights is meaningless. So translate what they're saying into real business impact for them based on your expertise as the expert in that domain. Then I want to make sure you respect the clock, because their time is valuable, as is yours. So check in halfway. Hey, we're halfway through the call. I know you had that specific question here. Because we only have 15 minutes, do you want to go deep there? Or is there other things you want to make sure that we covered to make sure that this call is a 10 out of 10 for you? And then I want you to make sure you leave time at the end for next steps. Don't be the person that's like, oh, wow, we're out of time. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation. You look like a fool. Own it. You're the one that owns the clock, not them. Drive that call. Now, here's some behaviors that kill the perceived value of you and lower your stock instantly on the call. Talking for 70, 80% of the call. that means you're not having a conversation. Ask questions that you could have answered by reading their website or looking at LinkedIn. Like, come on, take 5 minutes and do some prep. And saying, great, fantastic, after everything they say, and never go deeper or rush past their answers just to get to your pitch. If they feel like they just got interrogated and then just got pitched, number one, they're going to think that was not a great use of their time. And if they think it was a waste of their time, there's no chance in hell they're going to buy. Here's how to execute and really ask the right questions, because execution is where most reps think they're good, but the truth is they're just not. Execution is how you run the conversation, not how well you read a script. So what right questions actually mean? A right question moves the conversation forward towards a decision. A right question reveals real business impact, not just surface pain. And a right question helps both of you decide if it's worth continuing. Generic questions don't do any of that. It just fills airtime. So here's how I think about the flow to help you go from broad to deep. So broad is helping you understand the landscape. So saying things like, hey, walk me through how you're doing X today, or help me get clear on what the main goals are for your team this year or this quarter. Then we want to go deeper and dig into the specific problems that they're having. Hey, you mentioned why is a bottleneck. Tell me more about that. Or in that process, where does it break down the most often? Or where in that process is going to prevent you from getting to your goals? Then we want to dig into impact, which is attaching the real cost. So what happens when this goes wrong? Or how does that show up for you guys? Like, is that revenue, cost, CSAT, risk, whatever? What is that for you? Then we want to make sure we're clear on the priority and timing. Out of everything on your plate, because I know it's a lot, where does this rank? Or why look at this now instead of 6 to 12 months from now? And here's how I like to structure my questions using a simple mental model called the FALL framework, which stands for frame, ask, listen, layer. Now, quickly on the frame, you ever see an athlete that gets interviewed? They're not just saying, hey, tell me how it felt out there tonight. The person that's interviewing them will give a lot of context around the question. They'll say something like, hey, I know you've been on injured reserve for the last 4 weeks, and there's a lot of speculation how you were going to fit into the offense when you came back. Now being out there tonight, how did it feel? Right? All that context made it easier for the person being interviewed to give a good answer. Same thing for your buyers. So you want to give context, then ask the question. Then once you get the answer, as you're getting it, I want you actively listening, not interrupting. Pay attention to the words that they say, the tonality that they use, because you're going to layer with a follow-up based on what they just said. So an example sequence for the ask is, hey, walk me through how you manage process today. Listen, you mentioned that it's manual and slow. Expand on that, because slow means a lot. Like, does this mean it takes a day to do this, a week, or a month? Just so I can understand the situation. And then listen to what they're giving you. And when that happens, when it takes 2 weeks, as you mentioned, what does that cost you in terms of, like, is that a revenue impact, customer experience? Like, what's the real impact to the business? And by doing this, we're not reading off a checklist. We're not making the buyer feel like they're being interrogated. We're following the thread of a conversation. So here's some guidelines for great questions. Good questions are open-ended, not fluffy. They're specific enough to create direction. They're tied to business impact. And here's a couple of my favorites. Hey, if we're having this conversation 12 months from now, what would need to be true for you to call this a success? Or who else cares about this problem as much as you do internally? And I want you to avoid questions like, hey, so what keeps you up at night? Or, hey, if I could wave a magic wand. Or those are crappy generic questions. Or asking for budget when you're 3 minutes into the conversation before they even believe that this is a problem worth solving. Generic questions equal generic deals, and generic deals don't get done. Now let's talk about adversity and how you can handle objections without freaking out in the call. Objections on a discovery call, they're not a bad thing. Adversity is simply any moment where a buyer pushes back. Maybe they hesitate, maybe they challenge your point of view. Whatever that is, that's all it is. Now most reps, they're gonna tense up. They'll get defensive, they start rambling, and this is where the deals are gonna die. How I view objections, I actually see them more as a good thing than a bad thing. I see them as data points. I see them as a sign that they're actually thinking about my solution. I see it as an opportunity to get a deeper understanding of their situation, because if there's no objections, they probably don't care that much. Now, when objections show up, here's some typical spots of when you're going to hear objections. When you're digging deeper and asking those real impact questions, or when you start talking about changing their processes, or when you start to hint at investments or resources needed. But sometimes I'll even intentionally invite the objections just to get all the cards on the table. And I'll say something like, look, most teams I talk to, they have a lot of concerns, whether it's timing, budget, priorities, or even change management. I mean, from your perspective, which of those do you think is going to be the biggest blocker here? And by doing this, now we're talking about the real stuff. Now, here's how I handle objections using a very simple framework, and I call it AIA, which stands for acknowledge, isolate, answer. So example, buyer says, hey, this probably isn't a priority right now. What you're going to do instead of answering is you're going to acknowledge it, because you want to make sure they feel heard. Look, totally fair. I know you get a lot on the plate, and the last thing you probably need is another distraction that isn't worth it. And then what we're going to do after we acknowledge is we're going to isolate whether or not this is the only objection or if this is the real objection. So you'll say something like, look, aside from timing, is there anything else that would hold us back from being worth exploring? Then we get into answering. answering. So let's say in this instance, they say, look, timing is the only thing. You say, look, makes a lot of sense. Given that, why don't we do this? It might make sense to map out what worth it would really look like for you. And then we can decide together whether or not we should pause or keep going before we get too deep. Would that be helpful? Now, by doing this, you're going to stay calm. You're not going to take it personally. And for God's sakes, you're not going to argue with them. Now, here's some principles and mistakes. Principles: stay curious, not defensive. Treat objections like puzzles and not attacks. And always seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Now, big mistakes: steamrolling past their objections and pretending that it's not a real issue or you didn't hear them. Or getting into arguments or getting defensive about it. Or thinking an objection is just a need to discount. So immediately discounting or over-promising, just like fix it on the spot. Look, if you can handle adversity well in discovery, you become the rep that they trust to lead them through the rest of the process. Now let's talk about driving forward and getting clear next steps on the table. Because a discovery call without a clear next step is just a nice conversation. And what driving forward actually means, you're going to leave the call with a mutually agreed upon calendar locked next step that makes sense for both them and you to move the deal closer to a decision. So a successful discovery call confirms if there's a real problem worth solving, clarifies who needs to be involved, and ends with that specific next step. Who needs to be involved, what needs to happen, when does it need to happen, and why does it need to happen? And also, if it's not a fit, success also means it's a clear no, not let's circle back later and let's get back to you. Now, when do you start steering towards the next steps? I don't want you waiting to the last 60 seconds of the call. I like to think about 15 to 20% of the time left in the call. That's when you start landing the plane. So if it's a 30-minute call, at about like the 7-minute mark, that's when you really want to start driving this. Now you should already be thinking, hey, what's the next logical next step to help them make a good decision? Now here's how I summarize and propose the next step using a simple structure. First, I'm going to summarize. Let me recap what I'm hearing to make sure we're aligned. Then you share their current state, their main problems, impact, goals, desired outcome, all of that. And then you're going to check, hey, did I miss anything? Did I get anything wrong? Is there anything else you want to add? And then you're going to do a value check. Hey, based on our conversation, does it sound like this is something worth exploring further? Get their buy-in or address any objections that they have, because they very well may have them right now. And then once you get past that, you're going to propose. And then you're going to say, look, given all that, since we're in agreement that it makes sense to continue, the best next step from here typically is X, and that's going to help you. And then you insert a benefit for them. How does that sound? And here's some examples. So deeper technical discovery with their ops and IT to make sure that you're clear in the scope. A tailored demo with additional stakeholders to make sure that they can really visualize and see the solution in their world. Or an executive review that's really based on the business case to really help them understand if it makes sense to even think about a business justification for this. Or building a simple mutual action plan to make sure that there is a clear plan to execute it if the urgency and fit is clear. And then what you're going to do is you're going to lock all this in. And you're going to say, look, if you're not opposed to it, let's get that on the calendar while we're together so don't lose momentum. What does your calendar look like over the next couple of days? I like to schedule as soon as possible because days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and months kill deals. And you're going to book it on the call. You're not going to send times later and see what happens. You're going to get it booked on the call before you hang up. Now, here's some mistakes that lead to nice chat, no next steps. If you're the one asking, hey, so what do you think we should do next? And putting it all on them, you're immediately lowering your status. Or ending it with, hey, I'm going to send you some info and not getting anything scheduled. Or going over time so you literally have no runway left to agree on anything. You're the guide. You're the expert. And guides guide. So make sure you guide them towards making an effective decision as quickly and efficiently as possible, because that's what you're there to do. Now, if this was helpful and you're serious about accelerating your growth in tech sales, this discovery framework, this is just one piece of the system. Inside Sales Rep Accelerator, we install proven frameworks for discovery, demo, negotiation, deal strategy, systems for pipeline, forecasting, career moves. And it's the same system that's helped hundreds of reps add anywhere from 50 to 100K to their income consistently in under 12 months. Folks like Bailey added 80K to his quota in under 6 months. Or Laura used this rep to secure a promotion and get a 75K commission check implementing these systems. Look, all we're doing is helping them implement systems, not vibes. And if that sounds interesting, click the link in the description and book a call with my team. What we'll do is we'll audit your situation, audit your pipeline, how you execute to make sure that we can help you get to that next step in your career. Check it out. I'll see you on that call. Now, if you have questions about implementing the discovery framework, drop them in the comments. I do read all of them. I try my best to answer them. And then if there is some really juicy questions, I very well may turn that into future videos. So go ahead, dig into the comments. And if you enjoy this, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and send this to a rep on your team who needs to level up their discovery game. My name is Justin J. Johnson. Build systems, not stress. I'll see you in the next video.